Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Raise Your Voice webinar. We're going to get kicked off here in just actually right now. But wanted to let people kind of sign up for Zoom and come in. A couple of house cleaning items. If you have any questions, you can post them to the Q&A pane, and we will either address them in line as we go through the webinar, or maybe hold some for the end. So to introduce our speakers today, we have myself, Eric Cerno. I'm the Director of Business Development here at Zesty.
And I'm Chloe Spilaccia, the Marketing Manager here at Zesty.io. Some people asked us before this even why we were going to do a panel on voice or a webinar on voice, and the quick answer is that we have clients who could benefit from this, so we decided to take it upon ourselves, do some research, and start actually building out the integration in our system, but also speaking with our clients and prospective clients on how we can help them get started planning for voice.
Thank you. And yeah, as a quick just lineup of what we're going to do here today, we're going to go through some what Zesty's about. We'll review the agenda and then cover some of the topics that we wanted to address with you. So, what is Zesty before we actually go into the rest of the webinar? So we introduce ourselves. The products that Chloe and I both work on, or the company we both work at, is Zesty.io, and what we've done is SaaSify enterprise web content management. That means we've taken and simplified delivery of content to websites, apps, connected devices like Xbox games, for example, one of our customers use it for. And now we are starting to go down the path of even more IoT devices, including connected speakers, and we're actually doing, while we don't have any in production yet, we've begun piloting with some customers currently, and that's kind of the impetus for this webinar, as Chloe mentioned.
Mm-hmm. So a quick agenda. We did decide to keep this webinar a little bit on the shorter side, 30 minutes, and in that time we're going to cover a contemporary history of voice, considering the history is not so long of voice technology. Reviewing the urgency and examining some of the trends in voice and voice technologies, how customers are using voice and other prominent brands in the market, and then finally taking those applications and presenting them in a way that you might be able to start planning for your own organization. Part of that actually involves the workbook that we emailed you 10 minutes ago. If for whatever reason you did not get that ebook, please email me directly at chloe@zesty.io, and I will make sure you have a copy. As that'll help you plan out the steps that you can take today to start implementing voice in your marketing strategy. So we'll start out with that contemporary history.
Most people, probably first iteration of voice interaction was 2001: Space Odyssey with HAL, which wasn't probably a positive one. But Knight Rider, came along after that. But really, voice technology started out in the 50s and 60s. Bell Labs had some very rudimentary interactions with voice and computer systems, and then IBM started to develop it further. The more modern kind of spin on it, though, really came out with Siri in 2011, when people could start interacting with their phones, and it became more of an assistant. In 2014, Amazon Echo, or the Echo launched, and everybody kind of became more familiar with Alexa, and it became more ubiquitous with voice technology. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is based on kind of that Alexa approach. But as you'll see from some of the pieces that we're looking at, it's the world of voice is expanding very quickly.
Absolutely. So what's the urgency?
So looking at, just as we talked about 2014, Prime members only kind of had access to the Alexa device, and you had to sign up quite a bit ahead of time even to get access to it before I believe they started pushing them in November, December that year. So very low amount of sales happened of those connected devices. 2015, we started to see a little bit more. 2016, and you can see last year, it more than, it doubled in 2016 and more than tripled in 2017, the purchase of these smart speakers. And that equates to about 20% of the population. So it's a significant amount of people that you can now reach with these connected devices, and what they're using them for is increasing more and more. And the frequency that they use them is increasing as well. So, we have a few people, 13%, that bought them and never use them. They're essentially paperweights. But you can see the majority of people use it at least once or twice a day, even more. More than half the people that own them use it that many times. And what kind of things are they using them for? Mostly it's what you use them for as well, if you own one. It's general questions, like what do they use them for? And then also, checking the weather. I do that probably twice a day. Streaming music, obviously, as the speaker technology is getting better in some of these smart speakers, and Sonos is coming out with their own rendition of it. That's kind of a more frequently used process. But you can see we jump down to the bottom. What a lot of organizations are looking for is, how can I use this to sell goods? And really the ordering products and ordering food and services is at the lower end of the usage of these Alexa devices. You can see, if you go up the list, more and more what people are doing is they're not necessarily buying it through a smart speaker, but what they're doing is gathering information about a purchase or doing research about a topic through their smart speaker. And that's kind of where we're looking at focusing, addressing some of the that interaction moving forward here.
Absolutely.
And as I mentioned earlier, the market as a whole, while it's grown exponentially in just certain devices, you can see the landscape is changing. So back in 2014, it was essentially all Alexa or Echoes. As we see it start to expand more and more, you can see that Amazon still has its hold on more than half the market, but the projected growth is that others will start to take hold, including Google Home and Apple HomePod, as well as Samsung just released their own version of it, and we expect some more to come up shortly. Especially in foreign markets, there's going to be more specialized foreign devices that pop up, and we're seeing that because there is some competition between Alexa and the other retailers that sell these speakers. So there's a little bit less worry when they put things up like Google devices.
So if we haven't convinced you enough that voice is a growing channel, it's a channel at least worth looking into, if not investing in sooner rather than later. Here are a couple more reasons why you should look into adopting voice. First and foremost is definitely audience reach. As we explained to you earlier, the growth of the market for voice devices and using voice in different applications are growing every day. So being able to potentially reach a new audience in a new channel can be extremely valuable to brands. The next is authority. So unlike a Google search where there are multiple different results for a question that you're asking, voice only has one answer. So if you're able to establish that dominance and that authority early on in the market, it will pay dividends later on. The third reason could be publicity. As marketers, we're always looking for reasons to be in the news and leverage some more PR wherever we can. So this is definitely a way that you might be able to do to see some more publicity. And the final reason why you might want to start looking into adopting voice is providing that additional customer value. We're always looking to provide value, education around our product and our brand. And so this is a really interesting way to actively engage those customers and potential customers in a conversation with your brand.
Great. And as we mentioned, what we want to talk a little bit about is those are the general things, right? So we're looking at not replacing websites or mobile applications, but really what we have here is something that they're not using in lieu of, but in addition to it. So it's another medium, and our customers are recognizing that, and we're looking at some use cases around ways we can help them, and our customers are coming out to us with ideas and seeing if we can execute on them. And where those kind of fall into are a few main categories. Informational. This one is kind of interesting because with voice, you don't have a screen. So how do you get that same information about, if you're a business that is worried about your location, or your hours. How do you get that information out through a different medium? Then there's more of the traditional kind of app or skill-based ones that we're looking at, which are those conversational or interactive ones, where you can create how-tos around your products, information gathering, or more about understanding what the product and services you offer can do for the customer. We have news, which is an interesting one. So this is, as opposed to it being more interactive and question-based, being invoked via like a flash news briefing or a podcast.
Google calls it the good morning routine.
Thank you. Yeah, so and then the other one is fun. So this is kind of one of the interesting ones, and back to the publicity, we're seeing some people starting to engage in these voice ones in a different way than they have before with other mediums.
So we're going to start digging into each one of these. If you can open the email that I mentioned earlier that sent the ebook, now would be a great time to pull that out and start looking at it as we're going to dig through some of this.
And actually, it's probably a good time to pause as well and just mention that this is part of a two-part webinar series. So a lot of these examples that we're going to be providing here in the second webinar, we're going to go through some of the more technical how-tos. So if you're interested in both aspects of kind of the how to use it and the how-to, then we'll make sure you get an invite for the next one. But otherwise, just be on the lookout for that. You can pass it over to whoever would actually implement these.
Yep, definitely. So looking at informational content, as Eric said, these are some of the basics, such as what are your hours today, where is this location, are there vegetarian options on the menu, right? So some of these might apply more to a brick and mortar store, but certainly can also apply to other businesses or services as well. What we would consider if you are looking to implement this sooner rather than later, this is a great first step, is looking at what informational content, what questions people are asking around your brand every day. You can do some digging into your Google Analytics for long-tail keyword research. Start planning around those questions that people are asking, and then you can actually implement some schema in the website directly to be able to answer these questions and become voice-enabled today. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. Some of the best ways to talk about these different applications is to actually put an example to them. So for conversational content, one example that Eric and I really liked when we were doing some research was Tide does a really good job of this. One of Tide's Alexa skills, you can ask Alexa with this enabled, hey Alexa, how do I get red wine stains out of my white carpet? And Tide will actually walk you through how to remove those stains step by step, which we thought was a really interesting application. So when you're looking at the workbook, we have a topic cluster exercise. Content for a conversational application should be focused on your brand, but a little bit tangential to the brand. How do you use your product or service, in what circumstances, things like that.
Yeah, and this is, it doesn't always end up saying Tide, which is amazing, but it's still, that value is what drives home the recognition of the brand and why people would enable this skill in the first place. And,
right, yeah.
Something like Alexa.
And, no.
I was going to say, we've seen poor implementations of this where people will build an entire skill or a voice app just around their product price or around, specific features of a product that people will, it's, not dynamic. And people might invoke it once and then never reuse it again. So it's not really a useful exercise in creating something like that. Whereas this is trying to interact with something that can happen day in, day out, and every use case is different.
Right, and another important thing to mention with this is that GAIN is not the authority on how to get stains out for voice. All is not the authority, it's Tide, and they own this space now, which is really interesting news for them. Looking at the next application for newsworthy content, there are a couple different things to consider. We thought Zyrtec was a really great example of newsworthy content. Zyrtec has an allergy cast that will tell you what the weather is that day, pollen count, and predominant allergies for your area. So when you wake up in the morning, you hear your weather, and then Zyrtec tells you that the allergy cast is a 4 out of 10 today, so you should be okay. But if it's a 9 out of 10, you could preemptively take a Zyrtec to get through your day without sneezing.
And this is a cool one because you can integrate it in with your Amazon Flash, or what was the Google one? The
Good morning
routine. So, and once somebody invokes that as part of that process, they don't have to even interact with it. It's a passive kind of reminder that that product exists while still providing them value every morning.
And again, Benadryl does not own this space right now. It's all Zyrtec, which is really interesting. So if you're thinking about your brand, and if there is something where you're considering maybe, oh, newsworthy content might be interesting here, taking a look at the workbook that we put together, there's a couple things that you might want to make sure, or you do want to make sure, that it actually checks that this content is newsworthy. Is it value adding? Is it regularly changing? And is it repetitive? If it meets all those 3 criteria, then you have a decent idea for newsworthy content for an Alexa skill. And then finally, my favorite one, I think both of our favorite one, is fun content. Johnny Walker has a really interesting example. You can see videos of this online, or if you have an Amazon Alexa, go ahead and grab a bottle of Johnny Walker and ask Alexa to do a guided tasting with you. This is a really interesting application where Johnny Walker has this initiative, and they have had this initiative for some time, to educate their customers and potential customers on whiskey, not just, the focus isn't necessarily just on sales, but also educating around the product, which is really interesting. So they have a couple different skills. One is the guided tasting. Another is Whiskey 101 facts. So you can ask it to tell you an interesting fact about whiskey, and it will tell you something interesting. So this is a really, really cool idea. It's a really interesting way to interact with Johnny Walker in a way that you probably wouldn't otherwise.
And now you can blame us as you're doing research on these Alexa ones and try this out at work.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. So again, this is something where this is going to be a little bit more tangential to your brand. Johnny Walker did a really good job of coming up with an idea that is product focused, but still provides value to the customer. But there are a lot of scenarios in which this is going to be a little bit maybe more tangential to your brand. So consider that as you are developing ideas for fun content for an Alexa or Google application. So no webinar is, interesting if there aren't actionable steps. So a couple of the things that you can do today.
So as we talked about, the some of those pieces of content, like basic things, store hours, right? One of the things you want to do is make sure that you become the system of record for getting that information into Yelp, into Google, and they're constantly crawling websites and other resources to figure out what those look like. There's a good way to feed that information in a pretty straightforward manner, and that is through kind of these more standardized schema markups. So if you go to schema.org and you fall into one of those industries that they have predefined, you'll see that there's a number of fields that you can begin to fill out today and include on a website that can then feed all these other informational sources, including Alexa, Google Home, and Siri and all the other voice-activated assistants. So that's one step you can take today and provide quick access to data to your customers without having to actually go through and develop any proprietary skills or applications for any of these other solutions. And then we also have the Alexa skills. So now we can take and build out these skills that if you go to Amazon's website, they actually can let you log in and start developing the skills at no charge. There's a ton of research on there and answers to questions you might have around how you invoke the different voice commands and kind of what you can do in that space. Obviously, when you want to start running into production, there's costs involved, and there's development costs involved with that as well. But one of the interesting things, and we'll talk about it on the next webinar as well, is the getting the content into that skill and being able to quickly modify that content without having any development research or without needing development resources by your marketing team. And that's one of the areas that we've started jumping into helping our customers with. But keep in mind that we showed you that pie chart earlier. Alexa and Echo/Echo is one of these speakers out there. As the market's expanding, it's going to be similar to developing an app for iOS and for Android. You're going to have to probably be looking at additional porting over of your voice application into other mediums, and we can talk through that again on the next webinar where the content can be replicated without actually having to worry about all the code behind it.
Yep.
And then again, the other parts that you want to take and begin looking at is search engine results. So again, there's standard SEO or search engine optimization we're used to with Google, but now we have these new stores of applications. The Alexa store where we can begin to find skills, and they have different ways that they rank or allow people to search for those skills. So making sure you pay close attention, and I think we have some tips that we can send out around making your skill discoverable by the way it's named, making it something that they would commonly look up or something that they would try to address as part of that skill name. And then there are ways now to do nameless invocation as well, where you can actually implement elements or your entire skill by not having to specifically call out Alexa, use Johnny Walker for the tasting, but actually just specifically around you're the expert for this particular content, and it can invoke answers now without needing to actually use your application. So there's different ways to do that, and we actually have a link in this slide that you'll have access to afterwards to show you what that looks like, and we'll also talk about it on the next webinar. And then spreading the knowledge. So we're talking about search engine optimization and searching within those skill stores, but then there's also going to be the fact that before even somebody asks a question, besides that nameless invocation way to actually involve your content or invoke your skill, you want to make sure your customers know about it. And a lot of that is through more traditional methods of advertising, spreading the word, emails. I don't know if you have anything else to add around that.
Yeah, definitely. I would say a really great way to kick off a project, if you have an idea of how to start implementing voice in your marketing technology, might be to send out a survey. Hey, what do you use Alexa for right now? What devices do you use? How are you using them? So that you actually get an idea of your customers' actual user behavior, so that as you go into considering developing this, you have a decent idea of how you can tailor it to your audience. And with that being said, we have about 5 minutes left for questions and answers. I do have a couple in here already, so I'm going to address them as they come in. Feel free to continue throwing them in there, guys. All right. Let's see. We'll start with a really good one. Okay, the question is, are there now, or do you think there will be, any organizations that produce universal standards and guidelines for voice technologies, the same as there are for other internet languages, or will this remain a disjointed landscape more similar to mobile applications, where large corporations dictate their own standards for their software with little comparability between them? That's a really, really good question.
I don't know if I know the answer to that.
Yeah, I certainly don't have an answer off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, for the current, looking at the way that the landscape is progressing right now, it looks like it would be similar to the way mobile phones ended up progressing along, where we can, just based off of that, we can see that there is mostly disjointed, right? So the app development, the way that they get invoked. For example, Google offers more conversational approaches to its applications, where you don't have to recall the same launch word. There's context to when you ask a second question. So they have more of that capability right now than Amazon does, and so the apps work slightly differently. But that being said, there's probably going to be for example, browser standards are the same across those different platforms. So there could be some standards within it, but the overall, I think, will probably stay somewhat disjointed.
Awesome. That was a much better answer than I could have given.
All right, so we have another one here. What are your recommendations for coming up in Siri and Google Home Search? They don't have the same types of skill databases that Alexa does. What do you think of the future product service? Okay, right. So the Siri and the Google Home Search, that's that first one that we talked about. So it's less conversational, and I believe they're probably going to end up expanding some of the capabilities around interactivity between those. So I know there's some things being worked on. But for right now, what we talked about kind of as that initial thing, the informational category, where if you go to schema.org and you look at, if you haven't been there yet, essentially what they have is a bunch of breakdowns for different types of industries, different types of offerings, services, and websites. So like restaurants, for example, has its own schema category that lets you, with standardized inputs in it for your hours of operation. For parking or no parking, if you have, if it's good for kids, you know, that type of information that you frequently see come up on TripAdvisor or Yelp. And the way that that information is being fed into TripAdvisor and Yelp is, or one of the ways, is through the schema.org. And what's nice about that is that you can own that information. And that's kind of important because they also allow for hours to be pushed in by customers, but ultimately you want to be the authority in a lot of that information. So by following some of those best practices and implementing that through your website that gets crawled regularly, you can actually make sure that you maintain authority over a lot of that information that you want to own for that restaurant.
Alrighty, and we have one more question. We'll finish with this one so that we can wrap up on time. What do you think of the future of product and service conversions for voice search, and do you think we'll see conversion rates rise? I certainly envision that conversion rates will rise. It depends on what your conversion rate is. As we explained earlier in this webinar, we saw earlier in that chart for different uses of voice that ordering products and ordering services is at the very end of the spectrum. However, as we see adoption rates rise, as we see the proliferation of these voice devices in homes, in businesses, in offices, in everyday use, as they become more and more integrated into our lives, I believe that that number of ordering products and services or asking questions around it will go up. And so it's important when you're considering as a marketer what your funnel is, considering a conversion of somebody asking about your product may be a win, right? They may not order your product yet, but if they're asking voice about your menu, for instance, right? That's a win. They're asking about what sort of things you have to offer. They're considering coming in. And then once they actually are able to visit the restaurant and try your food, you know, then they're technically the conversion that we want, right? A sales conversion. But, you know, the fact that voice helped in that process and was able to facilitate, you know, answering somebody's question and providing more value to them, providing more information, definitely I'll see more applications. I believe we'll see more applications like that increase. Alrighty, thank you for those awesome questions. Want to make sure that we're respectful of your time and we are ending right on time here. So definitely keep an eye out. The next email is for part 2 of the Raise Your Voice webinar series. Is going to take place next month at the end of September, September 28th at 10 a.m. PST. This will be guided by Simon Prickett, one of our engineers here at Zesty.io, who has extensive experience in implementing voice capabilities, IoT devices, and things like that. So he's actually going to help walk step by step through the process of implementing voice and those strategies. I would suggest between now and then you do have a little bit of homework. Consider taking out that workbook, which I have right in front of me. I'm sure you can hear me shuffling through it. Consider taking out this workbook, really start mapping out your plan. It makes a lot more sense to have a plan before you actually go in and implement it, right? So let's start at the beginning. Let's get some really great topics going, and then Simon will be able to help guide you